This card is arguably the most important baseball card of all time. No, I'm not talking about the fact that this is a Don Mattingly Donruss rookie card. Actually, believe it or not, this isn't his rookie card. The truth is that this is a carefully designed fake. And the thing is that the notoriety of this card and the fact that there were counterfeits made of it at the time is precisely why this is the most important baseball card seriously of all time. If we did not have the Mattingly counterfeit scandal, we never would have had the Upper Deck Company. And that means that we never would have had the holograms, we never would have had the inserts, the serial cards, the relics, and all of the other things that define the modern baseball card market. And it all goes back to one thing. It all goes back to the fact that 1984 was really part of the junk wax era. The 1984 Donruss set was special because the company actually didn't print a lot of cases like this. Actually, to this day, boxes like this one are rare, and I've got no idea what foolish company once offered this sealed box for $7.95. An unopened box alone will run you well over $1,000 these days, and that price is likely going to increase in the future. So it's been over 40 years since 1984, and you don't need to remind me of that since I was born in 1984. We've had more than enough time by now to tell that the demand for 1984 Donruss is not just release hype. The set was actually short printed, and nobody knows by how much. Now, the conventional wisdom at that time was that there were more than enough cards out there for everybody. This May 1984 article estimated that Topps was making about 700,000 copies of each card, while Fleer and Donruss were restricted to about 400,000 copies of each card. Of course, if you read around, you will notice that there was something unusual about those 1984 Donruss cards. For example, this Johnson City, Tennessee article from late June 1984 claimed that Donruss sold out of all of its 1984 inventory in January and refused to reprint anything. As a result, complete sets were selling for twice their normal going rate, and this is before the set was even 6 months old. But are these sets really that short printed? Now, if you look at the numbers, you might start wondering what's going on. There's a pretty good, though speculative, thread over on the Net54 baseball card forums about the print runs of various baseball card sets. The estimate is over 350,000 copies of each 1984 Donruss card, which seems a little bit high to me. 1984 Topps, meanwhile, is estimated from 500,000 to well over 1 million. And nobody knows anything about the Fleer print runs, though I'm guessing 1984 Fleer must have been more common than Donruss. But then again, the thing is that these cards have all already been printed and they're already circulating. They've been circulating for 40 years, right? So we can probably infer their scarcity from the current going market rate, right? So for example, this 1984 Donruss complete set sold for $200 after a full eBay-style auction. Compare that to this 1984 Fleer set that sold for about $120, and note that there was only a single bidder. And then there was this pack-fresh 1984 Topps set that sold for just over $100 after a pretty fierce auction. So I guess that some of that might be lingering hype, but at some point in time you've got to consider the possibility that maybe there weren't a whole bunch of those 1984 Donruss cards that were produced. And the best evidence of all, of course, is the fact that the counterfeiters went after the Donruss Mattingly card. Of course, Mattingly was an impressive rookie in 1983.
To the hole, and base hit right field.
But it was Don Mattingly's consistency and excellence over the years that really made him a fan favorite. After he won the American League MVP award in 1985, Mattingly came second in 1986, and people started to realize that this guy was a serious Hall of Fame candidate. And that's the thing that created this craze around his rookie card. In fact, even though Donnie Baseball is not in the Hall of Fame, his superstar status and the craze around his cards continue to this day. And no Mattingly rookie card was prized quite as heavily as his 1984 Donruss card. Let me show you. Well, if you read your Marion, Indiana classified ads back in February 1984, you might have bought a full 1984 Donruss box for about $9. If you were in South Dakota in July 1986, just that Mattingly rookie card would have cost you a cool $9.50. That's more than the famous Conseco Donruss rookie cost at the time. By November 1986, this store in Ohio listed the Mattingly rookie as a great investment item, a steal at $40. This South Florida store was giving them away that same month, claiming that they were worth about $85 on the secondary market. By February 1987, this store claimed that it was worth $95. Mattingly was huge news to baseball card collectors in mid-1987, especially to this guy from somewhere in New Jersey. The accompanying article reports that a Donruss Mattingly rookie was worth between $65 and $95, depending on who you asked. Now think about this for a minute. $100 or so is a heck of a lot of money to spend on a relatively new card. We're talking about a set that was barely 3 years old at that time as well. That lets you know just how much of a craze there was around baseball cards at that time. And of course, this offered the perfect opportunity for counterfeiting. The first card to be seriously counterfeited was this 1963 Pete Rose rookie card, which was worth something like $200 in 1982. At first glance, this 1982 counterfeit version looks an awful lot like the original. There are about 13,000 of these counterfeit cards out there, each of which was stamped with the word counterfeit and original reprint. Surprisingly, there is actually a secondary market for these particular counterfeit cards, perhaps because they were required to be stamped by a court order. The FBI got involved in investigating the counterfeiting operation, which came out of California and which netted the crook hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, the Mattingly counterfeit operation didn't quite print that many cards, at least not that I know of, but the impact of the 1984 Mattingly fakes was a lot more serious and long-lasting than the impact of the Pete Rose fake cards. The story goes that the Mattingly fakes originally popped up at a baseball card convention in Anaheim right before Christmas 1986. There was a card dealer named Bill Hemrick who was offered 100 Mattingly cards for $4,000 cash total, cards that had a street value of about $9,000. Hemrick made the deal and the cards started spreading around, leading eventually to another FBI investigation. Now, these counterfeit cards were high quality, something that was really troubling the people in the hobby at that time. Mattingly was the hottest player in baseball in those days, of course, and his Donruss card had shot up in value. Plus, the Donruss card was scarce, and then there's this little bit about former coin dealers getting into baseball cards. And there's a lot of sketchiness, of course, that goes along with the coin dealers, but that's another story for another day. Now, it turns out that Bill Hemrick was not just some random card dealer. I guess he was a random guy in 1986, sure, but he had connections and he wound up taking a crazy risk in 1987 on a card shop in Southern California. The name of that card shop was the Upper Deck. So the story goes that Hemrick kept one of those counterfeit cards, he had it mounted, and he stuck it up on the wall. Maybe it looked something like this. Of course, these cards got the same stamp treatment that the old Pete Rose cards got, and they're really not that easy to find. Anyway, one day a potential customer named Paul Sumner looked at the card on the wall and could tell it was a fake just by looking at the card, since he had been in the printing business for years. Sumner had been working for an Anaheim company called Orbis Graphic Arts, and he understood processes like color separation. He also understood the importance of things like holograms to prevent counterfeiting, something that was standard at that time in the credit card industry. And so that fake Don Mattingly card led directly to the founding of Upper Deck, the company that revolutionized the card industry like no other company before. And this is an incredible story, especially when you realize that Upper Deck has had a bigger influence on the state of the modern card industry than any other company. Of course, the story of Upper Deck itself is a little bit too long for this video. But when you think of baseball cards in 1984, you really have to start with that Donruss Don Mattingly card. Now, if you're lucky enough to get a PSA 10 Mattingly card, you're looking at about $6,000 or so, depending on how you sell it. This Sports Collectors Daily article from December 2024 estimates that a PSA 10 would net you about $2,000 and notes that there have been over 4,100 PSA 10s, but the price just continues to rise. This card is significantly scarcer than that iconic 1989 Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card, which of course was manufactured by Bill Hemrick's Upper Deck company. Well, what goes around comes around, right? Anyway, aside from the mystique of that Don Mattingly card, the thing about 1984 Donruss is that it is an absolutely fantastic set. Like 1983 Topps, 1984 Donruss is one of those must-buy sets, especially if you're interested in collecting cards from the 1980s. In addition to its most famous card, the rest of 1984 Donruss looks absolutely fantastic. The fronts are vibrant and colorful, and the focus is on the large photo, not on a bunch of ugly borders. Like the earlier Donruss sets, the backs are easy to read and simple, and they are a lot more legible than what Topps was doing. Donruss also offered some cards that showed action shots, though these photos were clearly taken in spring training. Of course, one weakness with the backs is that they could only hold about 5 years worth of data, which meant that your Nolan Ryan card looked kind of empty. Donruss also did a bunch of special things. The Diamond Kings were back for the 4th straight year, though the artwork here is not quite as fantastic as it was in the earlier years. But hey, at least Mike Schmidt looks really cool. As usual, there was a card for the San Diego Chicken, and this one looks perfect for autographs. There was also a bit of controversy over these Living Legend cards and whether they counted as part of the base set. The cards were only given letters A and B and were only available in packs. In that sense, they are technically short printed, though they're really not all that scarce. The question is whether the full set should be considered 660 cards or 658 cards minus the A and B card variations. Now, one of the things to remember about 1984 Donruss is that these sets were available directly from the company in sealed full sets. There weren't a ton of these, however, and the sealed copies did not have those cards A and B. You can still find these factory sealed sets to this day, and they're worth a little bit more than the hand collated sets. Interestingly enough, the factory set also comes with all the puzzle pieces in case you wanted to make the puzzle. The 1984 Donruss puzzle featured Duke Snider, and I guess the artwork looks fine, though I honestly think that there's too much border and not enough art. So like back in 1983, Donruss did make a few extra sets to tap into that insatiable demand for baseball cards. And for the only time in its history, Donruss made its Champion set. I'm not sure why Donruss bothered to make this 60-card set, but here we are. 35-cent packs featured only 5 cards, which seems like a ripoff when compared with the normal Donruss set. These were large-size cards, which I guess was part of the selling point. Current players received photographs. Meanwhile, the legendary players received drawings, which I guess look okay, maybe? And the backs featured comparisons between modern stars and legends, such as this one between George Brett and Ted Williams. Now, this set was not a bad idea, though I've got to wonder why in the world this was a separate set. I mean, why not shrink the cards down to normal size and just make it an insert set? Unfortunately, it would be years before companies figured that one out, led, of course, by Upper Deck, and you knew I was going to mention them again, didn't you? Anyway, Donruss also made an Action All-Star set, which was a lot better. You would still only get 5 cards, but at least these ones looked good. Donruss had some of the best photography in the entire industry back in 1984, and the backs of these cards look great. This is almost like a preview of what was going to come in a few years when Score entered the industry. Now, that's probably enough about the 1984 Donruss set, at least for now. The thing is, though, that we can't leave out Fleer. Though the Fleer cards were almost certainly more heavily printed than the Donruss cards, 1984 Fleer is an iconic set for so many reasons. 1984 Fleer also featured that Don Mattingly rookie card, and as you can see here, the card design itself is actually pretty good. The backs could still use some work, but at least the fronts were an improvement over 1983. That Mattingly card and the Strawberry card are the 2 must-have cards from this set. But then you've got the iconic cards like this one of Glenn Hubbard holding a snake. And by the way, that's a real boa constrictor. This is not a fake. That is seriously one of the most iconic cards of the 1980s, and this is the card that made Fleer stand out long before that infamous Billy Ripken card was a thing. This is simply genius baseball card design. So according to this Hall of Fame article, the story here is that Hubbard asked a random photographer for a picture of himself with a snake, not knowing that the photographer was also working freelance for Fleer. Hubbard was upset for years that the photo had been printed into a card, though he eventually mellowed out. About a decade ago, the Lexington Legends made a bobblehead out of that famous Hubbard baseball card pose. Personally, I think that this is absolutely cool, and I really wish we had more baseball cards like this one. Now, normally I would have made that Hubbard card the focal point of this video because it's absolutely memorable. 1984 was just a crazy year for great and iconic baseball cards, but Fleer really took the cake. While Donruss made a solid set with thin borders and awesome photography and a set that continues to maintain its value, Fleer went all out for creativity. We've never seen a set quite like 1984 Fleer. This Jay Johnstone card is infamous for the Budweiser umbrella hat. This is a pretty bold move for cards made for children. Topps Vice President Cy Berger was really upset, but then again, Berger probably should have been taking notes considering how lame 1984 Topps was. Fleer also had a card commemorating the infamous pine tar incident. This is yet another bit of evidence that Fleer actually had a sense of humor and of baseball history. And there was a special card called Going Out in Style for Gaylord Perry, who retired at the end of the season. And I could go on. So the thing here is that Fleer really stepped up its game in 1984. 1983 Fleer was a good set, sure, but 1984 Fleer is one of those all-time classic sets. Even the packaging looked better than Topps. Of course, the 2 photos on each card advertisement is not quite as impressive when you realize the one on the back is in black and white only and is low quality. But the card design is great and these cello packs look absolutely inviting. Even the team sticker insert cards look really cool. So Fleer also came out with an update set. This was following Topps' lead. This was one of those sets that you had to buy as a box straight from the dealer. And I sure hope that you bought it back then because these cards cost quite a bit of money today. Though it's not as iconic as that Donruss Mattingly card, the Kirby Puckett rookie card is worth quite a bit of money. And this Roger Clemens card is pretty well known, though it's not quite as iconic as the 1985 Topps rookie. Fleer also made a card for Dwight Gooden, who was the true 1984 rookie phenomenon, though Topps had a traded card for Gooden as well. And there was even this traded card for Pete Rose in an Expos uniform. Can you believe that they even found room for Pete Rose's 1962 minor league stats on the back? Anyway, both 1984 Fleer and the 1984 Fleer update sets are iconic sets that you can't just ignore. I still think the 1984 Donruss looks better overall, but those Fleer sets really are must-haves. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same thing for 1984 Topps. Okay, there is a 1984 Topps Mattingly rookie card, and it is part of the base set, not the traded set. And I guess that it's okay, maybe? The thing is that the Topps design was really blocky in 1984, and it doesn't have the charm of the circular insert photo the 1983 Topps had. Topps was working on making cards with more interesting photos, though these are still pretty bland. I mean, even this Rickey Henderson highlight card just looks boring. The back highlighted Rickey stealing 100 bases for the 3rd time, but the front doesn't even feature a shot of him stealing a base. So do you remember the Topps and Action cards from 1972? Yeah, I'll never remember why they did away with those action photos and decided instead to double down on having a bunch of really boring photos. Anyway, the traded set is more interesting than the base set, largely because of the Dwight Gooden rookie. The traded set also featured higher quality backs, which was nice. Of course, if quality is your game, you should forget about the base set and just go straight for Topps Tiffany. These sets were limited to a print run of 10,000, and they look a lot nicer than what you could get in packs. The only way you could get your hands on Tiffany was by buying one of these babies from your local card dealer. And if you look carefully, you can still find pretty good deals on sealed Tiffany sets. The people haven't quite realized yet just how limited those Tiffany sets are in relation to the normal print run. There's probably a print run of something like 1 million of each card of the base 1984 Topps set, and I'm not joking about this, by the way. There's a reason why the base set is cheaper than its competitors. When in doubt, go for Tiffany. There was also this glossy All-Star Game set, and these were some of my favorite Topps cards when I was a kid. The backs totally suck, and the cards are way too easy to find, but at least this was a good idea. Topps also made this collector's edition All-Star set, which has that 1953 Bowman color feel to it. Again, these cards are mostly worthless, but hey, at least it's something. And then there was the Serial series. Okay, this is where stuff gets really strange. Do you remember those Kellogg's 3D sets that I kept talking about in the earlier videos, right? Well, there was this company called Ralston Purina in those days that made competing cereals, and they decided to make a deal with Topps to come out with these cards that would be randomly inserted into cereal boxes. And there were 2 different versions of the series of cards, I think. It's kind of confusing. Okay, so Ralston Purina made cereals like Donkey Kong Jr., which was probably so filled with sugar that it would give you instant diabetes. The nutrition facts in those days conveniently left out the amount of sugar, though you can see here that sugar was the main ingredient. Anyway, while you were bouncing around the living room eating Donkey Kong Jr. cereal and watching Saturday morning cartoons, you could also enjoy 4 free baseball cards. Punch out the back of the box and you could send in for the entire set. All you needed was 3 proofs of purchase labels and 50 cents. Now the interesting thing is that those cards came in their own small wax packages inside the cereal. So this helps shield the cards from damage done by the cereal, especially the sugar. So how come Ralston Purina was able to do this with its cereal product, but Topps wasn't able to wrap the gum up for its own base set? Anyway, you could still find these unopened packs, which is pretty cool, I guess. It's kind of strange to me that people decided to keep these flimsy things sealed for over 40 years, but whatever. Ralston Purina had tons of crazy cereals back then, like Rainbow Bright, which was probably another journey to the magical land of sugar overdose. And seriously, you guys who hold on to these empty cereal boxes are pretty strange. Anyway, like I said, there were two different versions of these cards. One of them has the Topps branding, and I think that was probably a test run. Rumor has it that those boxes were unmarked. The other one has the Ralston Purina branding and seems to be more common. In that great Topps tradition, the card photos are about as boring as they can possibly be. There is literally no difference between the variations other than the company logo. I guess the Topps backs might be a little bit more legible. Seriously though, graphic design has come a long way in the last 40 years. Anyway, like I said, you could get the whole set if you ate enough Cookie Crisp and gave them 50 cents for shipping. The set came in a package like this, and seriously guys, throw away your old envelopes. And as usual, Topps partnered with all sorts of food companies to make cards to go along with all sorts of food products. I think part of this was Topps trying to stop the other companies from tying their cards in with food other than bubblegum, and Topps of course had the exclusive rights to bubblegum for some stupid reason. Anyway, it's all kind of pointless since people in the mid-1980s were already collecting cards just for the cards, not for the extra crap, but we still got a few interesting sets as a result. For example, the Topps Drake's Big Hitter cards look really cool. Why couldn't Topps use more action photos like these for its base set? And these cards came in these nice boxes that looked a lot like the 1982 Kmart set. There was also this Topps Nestle Dream Team set of 22 cards, which most people have forgotten about. Dave Winfield looks like he's bored by yet another set featuring player profile photos. The real kicker though was this Topps Nestle set. And this is really where it gets confusing. So the Nestle set is exactly the same as the base Topps set, except that there's a Nestle logo on the cards instead of the Topps logo. I'm not sure what kind of arrangement the companies had. I do know, however, that the Nestle cards are much more scarce. And I also know that you had to cut the Nestle cards out yourself, which is always a risk. The story is that you had to buy something like 5 Nestle candy bars and set in the wrappers with a couple of bucks to get an uncut sheet. So here on the back it says that you needed $5 and those 5 wrappers, so get snacking once you're done with your Cookie Crisp. The uncut sheet came in a mailing tube, which means that the cards were pretty warped unless you straightened them out. And I mean, the idea is cool, but how in the world are you supposed to cut out your Strawberry Rookie to get your PSA 10? Anyway, these are really not rare at all, and you can find full sheets for relatively cheap. And now you have at least some idea of just how rare it is to get a PSA 10 from that set. But then again, since the design is really ugly, the overall price is lower than you probably would have expected. As usual, there were also a few unusual 1984 baseball card sets that were produced. We tend to call these oddball sets, though some of them are actually really cool. So for example, you've got this Vic Palos set of baseball stadium postcards, which are kind of interesting. The 1984 version apparently focused on San Diego based on what I've been able to read. My favorite is this shot of the 1984 Olympic baseball opening ceremonies at Dodger Stadium, which is a photo I've never seen before. Anyway, there was also a set or two from the Star Company, which were for individual players, like this one for Darryl Strawberry. Now, Star is noteworthy because it was the only company making basketball cards in the mid-1980s. This is after Topps decided to quit the market. Star's cards were only available through mail order, they were very limited, and they came in these clear cello packs, which is pretty cool to be honest. Unfortunately, there's really not much of a market for sets like this George Brett set, and apparently these cards came in uncut sheets of 3. And there's also a set out there for those of you who are interested in baseball tabletop games. Milton Bradley came out with a game called Championship Baseball in 1984. This featured a set of 30 game cards produced by Topps. While it probably can't be considered a tabletop baseball sim, it still is a pretty cool looking game. Now the cards look really boring, which is the way that you know that they are legitimate Topps cards. But hey, at least the stadium looks really cool. But if you're really looking for the best baseball card set of 1984, you have to go to Japan. Calbee was already known for making great baseball cards among the very few people who knew about these, but its 1984 set really stands out. These Calbee cards from the mid-1970s look absolutely incredible and are much more interesting than anything we got in North America. Calbee's Sadaharu O set from 1975-76 is nothing short of iconic, even though I think he struck out here. Anyway, the 1984 card set kept up Calbee's tradition of excellence, and seriously, these cards look fantastic. It's still really bizarre to me that Topps refused to touch action photos, especially when you consider that Calbee was almost all action shots. And even though these look like softball uniforms, you have to admit that these cards look simply amazing. I haven't found much information about these cards and these sets, but it's pretty clear to me that there were some special sets such as this one, which is from the All-Star Special Collection. Anyway, this Calbee set gets my vote for the best set of 1984. And really, it wasn't until Stadium Club in 1991 that we started to see North American baseball cards with this kind of emphasis on action photography. The thing is that not even Upper Deck in like 1989 or 1990 or whatever could match what Calbee had been doing for decades. And I would argue that those sets look much better than even the 2026 Topps base set, which I think looks totally ugly. You guys can go buy that one, I'm staying away. But then again, I think the 1984 Donruss and Fleer both look better than this year's Topps set as well, so there you have it. What do you guys think though? I mean, let me know down below in the comments. And I don't know about you guys, but I personally am looking forward to the next video about 1985 and the height of the rookie card craze.